Order, order. Thank you and welcome back to the second session of the committee's inquiry into social media, misinformation and harmful algorithms. I want to start by welcoming Paul Waugh MP and Liz Jarvis MP from both members of the Culture, Media and Sports Committee who are taking part in this evidence session as guests. It's the second session and the committee... Now, the committee did invite Elon Musk to give evidence, but he did not respond formally. But we are very pleased that we do welcome a representative of X this afternoon, as well as representatives of Meta and TikTok. These three companies and their subsidiaries represent a significant portion of social media traffic and therefore have a significant contribution to make to the debate on misinformation and algorithms. I will just note in passing that it's an all-male panel, and we generally do not. We try to avoid all-male panels, but given the challenges in bringing this panel together, we thought it was desirable to go ahead, and we are very pleased to see you. We are very pleased that you were all able to join us. We know that it has been challenging. But the reason why we are so pleased to have you here, and the reason why we've worked so hard for this panel to take place, is that there's a strong public interest in misinformation, algorithms and social media. It surprised me just how much public interest, given not everything about technology and science cuts through to the public. There's a strong public interest on this, and it's on that subject particularly that I want to thank you for taking part because of the strong interest that we have. We're seeking to understand what happened with the spread of misinformation over the summer, and to ensure that that's something that can never happen again. And just to start off, and what I will do is I will introduce you as I ask a question to each of you. So just to start off, it's like the interest in this has been significant, as I've said. Can I ask each of you, and I'm just getting my papers together. Let me start. So I'll start with Wilfredo Fernandez, who is the Senior Director of Government Affairs X, and I'll go across the committee to Chris Yu, who is the Director of Public Policy for North Europe for Meta, and Alistair Law, who's the Director of Public Policy and Government Affairs for UK and Ireland for TikTok. Can I just ask you, each of you, sort of briefly, let me say we've got a lot of interesting questions, and we have three members of the panel, so I am going to ask you to be brief, and I may have to use the chair's privilege to hurry you along at time. Please don't take that in the wrong way. So can I ask you, each of you, whether you do agree that big tech companies have a responsibility to be transparent and accountable before Parliament? And I'll start with you, Mr. Fernandez.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. It's an honor to be here. Absolutely, we agree in transparency and a duty to make sure that all our users experience X in a safe manner. So we're totally with you in that charge.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fernandez. Mr. Yu?
Yes, and again, thank you for having us here. Grateful for the opportunity to come and discuss these important issues with the committee. Absolutely agree, transparency is incredibly important. It's something that we strive for through all the work that we do.
Thank you. And Mr. Law?
Thank you, Chair. Echo my panellists' thoughts on welcoming us here today. Really appreciate the opportunity. Completely agree with your point on transparency. For us, this is, I think, the 12th Select Committee that we've attended in the 5 years that we've been operating and had a presence in the UK. Right. So very happy to be here.
Right, thank you. And by transparency, my question was specifically about accountability to Parliament, so that was the spirit in which you've answered it. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to move quickly to the actual sort of meat of the subject that we are looking to discuss today. And then again, I'm going to ask you in one sentence again to say whether you profited from the riots of the summer of 2024. I'll start with would you prefer to be Mr. Fernandez or Wilfredo?
Whatever the chair desires.
We'll start with Wilfredo.
Thank you, Chair. Whenever we have a high-profile incident, a flashpoint, such as this one, it is common for a lot of advertisers to pause and see how the events play out on the platform, and then eventually resume operations. So, no, I wouldn't say that we profited from this moment.
Thank you, Wilfredo. Chris?
These are incredibly difficult situations that we're talking about. I think all of us were really shocked and appalled by what we saw. Let's be very clear, like the content, particularly harmful content on our platforms that you're describing is not anything that we want to see. Like, we don't want it, our advertisers don't want it on the platforms, users don't want to see it. And so categorically, no, it's not something that we want.
And Alistair?
So look, I think just one thing to make clear is that TikTok sort of differs perhaps from some of the services that we're talking about today. We're much more of a global entertainment platform than we are the digital town square. And so in general, the types of content that we saw around that were probably lower in prevalence and not necessarily particularly misinformation focused. Having said that, we stood up a command centre of more than 100 people across 10 teams across the world precisely to take action against any violative content that we found. So I'd echo my fellow panellists, we didn't profit from it, no.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those responses. I'm just going to ask you again three questions to ask you to go through before we move into more detail. But I do want us to understand from each member of the panel what lessons you have learned from the riots and what would you do differently, if anything, if it happened again. Do you think you dedicated enough resource to coping with the spike in mis and disinformation? And also, how did you engage with government and law enforcement, and how could this have been improved? And I will repeat the questions if there's a lot there. Again, is it okay if I start with Fredo?
Sure. Immediately following the attack, we met with the National Security Online Information Team, the Secretary of State for Technology, Ofcom. We also worked with law enforcement to give them best practices training on our law enforcement portal, which was critical immediately following the attack.
And so did you dedicate enough resources in your view, and is there anything you would do differently?
So with every incident we learn, and with every response to such an incident we learn, we have very clear protocols in place on how to deal with this content. And the challenges that arise when we have sort of the aftermath of an attack like this. And so part of that protocol, first and foremost, is understanding how we can prevent harm and what we need to prioritize, understanding the contours of the conversation and where our teams can focus their monitoring and proactive detection, and make sure that detection continues until sort of that harm subsides.
Okay. Chris?
Yeah. So safety is our number one priority. We have very strict rules and policies around what is and is not allowed on our platforms. We have enormous efforts in terms of technology and also human efforts to enforce those policies properly. We have 40,000 people at Meta working on trust and safety. In addition, in incidents like the ones we saw last summer, we have crisis protocols we put into play immediately. And as a result of that, we actioned a significant volume of content on our platforms. We took down 17 pages which violated our policies on inauthentic behavior, which is where somebody is setting up a page purporting to be someone perhaps in a local community which is not representative. We took down 24,000 posts under our policies for breaking our rules on violence and incitement. We took down another 2,700 posts breaking our rules on dangerous organisations. All of this was action that we took proactively to make sure that our platform was safe and the issues that we're describing here were being dealt with. We had direct and I think constructive and regular contact with the government and with law enforcement, which is incredibly important in fast-moving situations like these. I think on your point, Chair, around lessons to be learned from these situations. One thing that I think is challenging is in these fast-moving incidents, it can be difficult to establish the facts on the ground in real time. And I think that is something which we all need to have a reflection on and understand how we could do better.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. Alistair.
So look, as I mentioned, when high-risk events occur, we, like unfolding public safety emergencies, we, as part of our crisis management protocols, launch command centres. We launched one in this instance with more than 100 people across 10 teams, working on a 24/7 follow-the-sun basis to make sure that we were moderating around the clock. As I said, the vast majority of content that we actually saw during the protests was not violative. It was often documentary or bystander footage, but we did see some rise in some violations, particularly around hate and misinformation. And in the 2 main weeks of the riots, our TNS teams took down tens of thousands of videos that violated our community guidelines and tens of thousands of violative comments as well. You asked about our engagement with government and other authorities. So from a law enforcement perspective, we were proactive in contacting and offering assistance with law enforcement. From a community groups perspective, we made sure that we were in contact with groups like CST and Tell Mama to make sure that we had further levels of information. Like others on the panel, we spoke to DSIT, the Secretary of State, and at a working level, and the Home Office as well on that basis. To your question on learnings, I think there are probably 3 things that I would take away. The first is very similar to the point that Chris just made, which is that sources of authoritative truth were difficult to ascertain, particularly given the fast-moving events. And I think as we both plan our activity, but also try and establish the veracity of potential claims, that's an area that we would like to both work on and work in partnerships with others on. We also, when it came to misinformation, frequently didn't see things that were being created on our platform, but did see some level of off-platform coordination that then came onto our platform. And I think from our learnings, we need to make sure that we're fully abreast of, we do have teams that do this, but of potential coordination that is going on an off-platform basis that may manifest itself on the platform in some ways. The idea of sharing video or sharing live streams, etc. And I think the final point is just a continued commitment to work both from an industry perspective but also with the wider value chain when it comes to potential flashpoints. And by wider value chain I include news broadcast media as well, because sometimes we would see a kind of feedback effect towards coverage on there and what we saw on the platform.
Thank you all for your responses. I just want to clarify that, Alistair, that you said that there was a team of 100 people set up around the world specifically to deal with the misinformation and disinformation that was coming out around the time of
the Southport protests and the subsequent civil unrest. Yes. Right.
Can other members of the panel give a similar sort of resource allocation or?
I don't have a specific number, but it's a cross-functional team that works around the clock, 24/7, similar to this, for a duration of period to while that incident protocol is in place.
Okay.
And similar, as I described, we had a crisis response protocol initiated. We had teams working around the clock. I don't have a specific number for you.
Perhaps if it's possible to identify the numbers, that would be very... We have one example, so it would be very interesting to have something to compare with. And I think the understanding how the crisis response teams work would be helpful to our inquiry. And I think you've all touched on issues, which I think we'll want to come back to, about the nature of the content that was shared on the misinformation. And I think, Paul, you have a specific question now.
Mr. Fernandez, can I start with you? Why have far-right influencers like Tommy Robinson and self-styled misogynists like Andrew Tate, both of whom have spread harmful content online, why have they been readmitted to X?
So shortly after the acquisition in late 2022, we instituted an amnesty program that allowed accounts who had previously been suspended to reapply for reinstatement, so long as their violations did not violate the law, and those accounts were included in that program.
So Andrew Tate once tweeted, "If you put yourself in a position to be raped, you must bear some responsibility." Would that be acceptable now on X?
I can't speak to specific hypotheticals, but our teams would evaluate that under our policies.
What's your view? I mean,
I'm not a trust.
It's not a hypothetical, it's a real example. He has said it.
Yeah, I'm not a safety professional. It's not what I do day to day, so I would leave that to our experts on the team.
And during the riots, Tommy Robinson was regularly tweeting that Islam was a mental health issue. He shared videos of the disorder, he encouraged people to join in the disorder. Would that be allowed again?
I can't speak to that specific post. However, if the chair would allow, I have brought some examples for members of the committee of community notes that both Mr. Robinson and Mr. Tate received in the wake of the Southport attack. We saw community notes in action, providing useful context and helpful context for people on X to address potentially misleading information. So I have copies of those. Should the chair oblige us in sharing that with the committee?
We can accept that as evidence.
We can accept that as written evidence. How many copies do you have? I mean, how many examples are there?
There are 5 examples of community notes focused on the Southport incident, and
yes,
I have copies for members of the committee if they would so like.
And another question to Mr. Law. Shortly after the Southport attack, TikTok's others search for bar spread misleading content, such as an incorrect name of the attacker. Why did that happen, and what have you done to make sure that doesn't happen again?
Sure. So the particular example that you're referring to was, as you say, an incorrect name of the attacker in the suggested search bar. Now, to take a step back, search suggestions are generally auto-generated on the basis of what people are searching for. And in that particular example, we were notified about it on the 30th of July. It was removed from suggested search that evening, and then it was taken down as a search result altogether the following day. Now, would I have liked that to have been faster? Yes, absolutely. But I would highlight 2 things. The first is that in the immediate aftermath of the attack itself and then subsequent protests, our main focus was on moderating the videos themselves that contain content. So there's a search term, it will obviously return videos, and our main focus was on making sure that video content itself wasn't spreading any violative content that would breach any of our guidelines. So I think that's the first point. The second point is that in response to that, we also during the period of time added search interventions so that when people were searching for things related to Southport, things related to protest, either those search terms were blocked or they came up with a result that then linked to further resources, tools and tips around mis and disinformation, including with some of our fact-checking partners.
Can I just, sorry, Paul, just to follow up on that, because I think it's a really important point because the other search for feature brings into your TikTok feed things that you haven't searched for. So you might not be interested in the name of, or the supposed name of the Southport killer, and then it will suddenly appear there. And I also note that that the function has been criticised for spreading false and harmful information by organisations such as the Molly Rose Foundation, for example, by recommending suicidal material and false election information. Why do you keep that function?
So just to be clear, when you talk about the idea of suggested search bringing something to somebody's feed, that's not quite the way it works. The TikTok experience is primarily through the For You page, which, if you're not a user, is where you will land and you will scroll through videos, not videos that people that you follow have posted, but videos that our algorithm determines may be of interest to you. The search feature, when you go to search, will indeed, as you say, come up with other searched for or auto-completed search. And as I say, it's primarily automatically generated. But in some of the examples that you were just giving there, it might be a thing where we're trying to just make sure that we're staying ahead of developments of bad actors. So if you take the Molly Rose Foundation example and suicide and self-harm content, the term suicide and related types of search terms are blocked and banned on TikTok. If you try and search for that, you'll be returned a safety centre result and a link through to the Samaritans as well. Obviously, people then, bad actors will seek to undertake differentiating versions of that and use algo speak, and a lot of our work is about making sure that we're staying abreast and ahead of those kind of developments so that we can be responsive to any evolution of that.
That's a good clarification, but still, I don't think it quite explains why it suggests queries for users based on keywords in their searches. So these queries that are suggested will not be what the user was originally searching for.
Well, it'll often be commonly related to what they've searched for. And then again, I think I'd highlight the point that I mentioned earlier, which is a search term in and of itself, we still absolutely do care about it. We will moderate it along or in line with our wider community guidelines. But we also have a very clear focus on making sure that when you search on a term, the videos that are returned are not violative of any of our community guidelines, be that on misinformation, be that on suicide and self-harm.
So are you saying, would the misleading, or in fact the wrong name of the Southport killer, would that come up in a similar situation? Would that come up again in others searched for in a similar situation?
In the example that you talk about, it came up because people had been searching for it. We then, in line with our broad community guidelines, went to assess the veracity of it and then acted upon it. As I said, I wish we had acted on it faster, and I think that is a learning for us, that, you know, that in and of itself is a feature that we need to continue to invest in and continue to moderate. But we did block it from suggested search by the end of the same day in which it was reported, remove it from search terms entirely the next day. So I think it in part goes back to some of the points that we were raising earlier about fast-moving events and authoritative truth. We were very focused on protecting things from a short-form video content perspective, making sure claims didn't get into that. Search was slightly lower down the priority list. I accept that we should have been quicker, and I'm hopeful that we will be in any future approaches.
Will you make changes to are you looking to make changes to the algorithm that determines what the search for feature serves in order to achieve that, or are you simply looking at how quickly you respond to basically horrific searches like that?
So I'd say two things separately there. The first is we're constantly looking to make levels of change in order to create the safest possible environment for our user bases. The second is when you talk about the algorithm that generates that, as I say, that's based on what people have searched. I think the area where we're looking to, kind of push lessons learned is on the moderation of those terms and making sure that that is as swift as possible. Because in and of itself, algorithms that sort of suggest a completed sentence on the basis of what people are searching is not necessarily harmful. It's about the content. That's where we apply our community guidelines and rules, and that's what we have to make sure is rapid, responsive and enforcing.
Question for Mr. Yu. In 2023, prior to the rollout of end-to-end encryption of Facebook Messenger, there was a total of 36 million reports of child sex abuse made to the authorities by social media companies. That's 110 million images and videos. Can you tell the committee, in your estimate, what percentage of those 36 million reports came from Meta platforms?
I don't have that figure.
I can tell you what the answer is. It's 85%. So you were doing a decent job. But now, because of the end of end-to-end encryption, because the end-to-end encryption used by Meta, the National Crime Agency suggests that they were expecting a decline of 80% of those reports from Meta this year. Is that acceptable?
End-to-end encryption is a fundamental technology designed to keep people safe and protect their privacy. We take these issues around safety and security incredibly seriously. There are a number of things that we do in terms of cooperation with law enforcement to ensure that we're able to act when, for example, a report is made on our platforms, that we can pass that to the relevant authorities. We're able to look in some cases at patterns of behaviour, for example, if an individual is setting up a large number of suspicious accounts, we're able to act on that and refer it. We work extensively with a number of partners around safety on these issues. It's important that we address them clearly and effectively. At the same time, encryption, as I've said, is a fundamental technology that also contributes to keeping people safe and protecting their cybersecurity. These are difficult issues to deal with.
Isn't it a fact that 20 years ago, someone like Gary Greta had to go to the other side of the world to prey on children? Someone like Jeffrey Epstein had to create his own private paedophile island. Now these monsters, all they have to do is go on to set up a group on Facebook Messenger. Isn't it true that you've turned Facebook Messenger into Epstein's own paedophile island? A place where you can do what you want without getting caught? And isn't it the case that you're defending that in the name of free speech?
There is no place for that content in society. It's clearly abhorrent. It breaks all of the rules and policies for our platforms. I would say on issues like these, we do need a whole of society response to these challenges. And so the technology companies, including ours, have a part to play in that, and we engage, I think, effectively and constructively with law enforcement. But these are also deeper issues in society that everybody needs to be engaged in. So we want to do our part, cooperating with others.
Another big issue for Facebook is actually the Facebook community groups that many of our constituents are part of. They have tens of thousands of members. Yet often their gatekeepers are individual admins, 2 or 3 amateurs who are expected to moderate that content, whether it's libelous content, harmful content, or other damaging content. Are you satisfied that your guidelines to those individual admins are robust enough to protect the public?
We have incredibly strict rules around what is and is not permitted on our platform. Those rules apply regardless of whether we're talking about these Facebook groups or other areas. We run the same policies and enforcement against those. Users in those groups can report content is concerning to them. Like, we're very clear with people about what's expected and not expected on the platform.
People in the group have to report the content. Nobody outside the group can report the content.
Some groups are set up publicly. Some groups are set up for their members, but that does not prevent the members in those groups from reporting the content.
But don't you putting a huge onus on 2 or 3 amateurs who are moderating each of these groups, which have got tens of thousands of members? You're putting the onus on those individual admins as gatekeepers to see whether or not that content is or isn't libelous, or is or isn't harmful.
No, because we run, as I've said, we run our own enforcement on the most severe harms and content that is prohibited on our platforms, and we allow users to report, and then as appropriate we will investigate those and take action where it's required.
Do you have any guidelines for those admins?
We have the community standards, which I'm happy to share all of this material with the committee after the session, but we're very clear about what is and is not allowed on the platform.
I mean, this is, I think, the issue that Paul's getting, or one of the issues that Paul's getting at, is this was a conduit for misinformation and for the organisation of the riots during the summer. So it is of concern the extent to which, the way in which they are managed and controlled, or not controlled, as it would appear, and that's something that the committee is very interested in. I think, Lauren, you want to come in on this particular issue?
Yeah, just on the one about privacy that you were speaking at there, Mr. Yu. So freedom of speech, does that mean freedom of consequence? And in the privacy thing that you just mentioned there, are we protecting people that have said and done some pretty horrendous thing? In terms of Facebook and other platforms, you have our data. You are directing the algorithms to it, so it does feel like a David and Goliath battle going on here. Can you give us this trust and confidence that the consequences of the impact of people saying and describing things and the misinformation will be held accountable? Those people will be held accountable, and you won't be protecting them through their anonymity by this privacy and encryption.
So, as I've described, we have community standards that govern our platforms. We've had those for more than 2 decades. Under those standards, we prohibit, for example, terrorist content, content designed to incite physical harm or violence, a number of other restrictions designed to keep people safe. And we run technology at scale to find the most harmful content and remove it from the platforms. When it is found, it is, as I said, taken down, where there should be consequences for the individuals involved, and those accounts may be suspended. I think if I may, the wider point here around responsibility, the platforms have a responsibility to set these policies, to set the standards and processes around them, to enforce them correctly and to the best of our ability, which is what we strive to do. The wider question of holding people account for their behaviour and some of the things we've been talking about today doesn't belong just to the platforms, it belongs to society, it belongs to the courts and law enforcement. It's for all of us, I think, to work in partnership to make sure that the internet and our platforms are a place that people can feel confident on.
So you won't be protecting people in that sense? They will be...
As I said, like where content breaks the rules, there are consequences.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Liz, you did good.
Thank you, Chair. If I could ask Mr. Fernandez about X-Premium accounts. X offers algorithmic prioritisation through the X-Premium accounts, but what checks are in place to see if a user is suitable for this?
So that prioritization is in replies. And so you have a boost within the reply product surface. So when you're commenting on someone else's post, depending on your level of X Premium, you have a different prioritization. So there's basic premium, premium, and premium plus. Premium plus being our highest tier that gives you the greatest boost in replies.
But what checks are in place to see if what they're saying is accurate or true or anything?
So all users
are allowed to say what they like?
Sure. All users, regardless of their subscription, whether they're paid or not, are subject to the same rules.
Sure. But what steps are taken if premium users share harmful or misleading content?
So for misleading content, we have an intervention called community notes. So every post and every user is subject to community notes or eligible for community notes, including advertisers. So this is a decentralized network of contributors that add helpful context only when two contributors have previously disagreed, actually agree that a note is helpful, is when that note is actually placed on a post. So X has no power to place or remove a note. It's completely powered by people on X.
But community notes don't stop the premium user from sharing harmful or misleading content, do they?
No, but what independent academic research has shown, accounts or posts that receive community notes are 80% more likely to be deleted, 50 to 61% less likely to be shared. So we actually see an incredible impact in reducing virality, and posts that receive community notes are demonetized.
I think we're going to come to. I think, in fact, we may as well come now to the points that you're making about community notes versus fact checkers. I think Emily.
Yes. So we'll start with some blue tick accounts during the riots. Illegal immigrants moved into the Dragonfly Hotel, Peterborough, with a video identifying exactly where they were and where the protesters were to go, a blue tick account. The Embassy Hotel in Gateshead houses hundreds of illegal immigrants in hotel next to nursery, again with a video encouraging people to go and riot there. Is that within your standards, or did you do anything to remove these during the riots?
I can't speak to those specific posts. It's possible that they may have received community notes.
You didn't?
I'm happy to have our teams have a second look at those posts. I don't have them in front of me, so I can't.
Let's stick with some of the stuff that blue tick accounts,
sure,
that the algorithm therefore boosts. Let's start with one we talked about earlier, Mr. Andrew Tate, blue tick account. Want to make sure many people see him. Labour cover up rape because they're rapists. Is that true?
I'm not in a position to evaluate his statement.
Right. Another blue tick account. Jess Phillips is a rape genocide apologist. Is that true?
Again, not in a position to evaluate that statement.
Let's see if any of these you'll have an opinion on. Apologies for some of the language coming out here. This cunt is openly screwing everyone, and he doesn't care why. We rise up and openly shoot Keir Starmer, as he needs to step down, or the people of the UK will force him to. If not, I will. Swearing emoji, swearing emoji, swear emoji. Blue tick account. Is that within your rules?
I would have our teams review that.
Right.
I
mean, I can keep going.
When a review, what would a review mean? A review, that would be, so it's not community notes. If they review that, they will look at taking it down, or?
So it depends. Again, I don't have the posts in front of me, and again, I'm not a safety team member who evaluates these on a day-to-day basis. To sit here and say that we find and we get the right call every time would be wrong. We make mistakes and we learn from them. We did take action on tens of thousands of posts, from account removal to labeling sensitive media to labeling hateful content. So
I'm happy to pass these to you.
Sure.
These took me about 10 minutes to pull together.
Okay.
Literally, that's how quick it was. But let's talk to one that was reported, and what action was actually taken or not.
Can we talk about the speed of actions? I think that's very important.
So in November, I posted a tweet about my petition to save my local post office. This was my reply from one person. You are a traitor to the British people, and you will swing oh so slowly on a gibbet. I had to look up what a gibbet is. It's not a pleasant thing. I was reported as harmful and violent speech, and in violation of your rules of expressing desire for violence is not allowed. That's your rule, right? These are your safety rules. No action was taken. No action is still taken. The post is still up. The same account continues to post, "The Jew is the enemy of all humankind. Bend over, bitch. I will fuck you. Here are your shekels."
Oh my gosh.
The goal is to replace Europeans with Browns before we organise to remove the filth. Zelensky will get his Mussolini treatment for what he's done to Ukraine. They are the enemy within. They must be destroyed. The Jew has infiltrated white society to teach children to hate themselves. Muslims are disgusting homosexuals. Zelensky is a dead man walking. This is all from the account. Luckily, not all towards me, but clearly all towards somebody. Is this acceptable under the guise of free speech on X these days?
No, those comments are abhorrent, and we'll have our teams take a look, absolutely.
Can you assure the committee this account will be removed?
I can't make any assurances. I can assure that our teams will review under our terms of service, and I'm sorry that you had to, experience that.
Okay, well, let's move on.
I'm sorry about that.
No, it's all right. But the thing is, these are not unique.
Yes.
I am not the only MP that gets these messages from these kinds of counts and report them, and no action is taken.
Well, you're happy to make money out of it, aren't you? Isn't that the point?
Right. Right. So, I wanted to next come to Alistair in terms of TikTok. Right. So, in your own guidelines, and I want to understand how the algorithm catches this and how it changes it. It talks about synthetic or manipulated material that shows realistic scenes must clearly be disclosed. And we do not allow synthetic media of any real private figure. We allow some latitude for public figures, but still do not want people to be misled by political or financial issues. So, it took me, again, about 10 minutes to find an AI of Keir Starmer standing in front of Downing Street and then jumping into a boat full of migrants in front of Downing Street. Clearly AI. No sign or disclosure of AI. This post has been seen 2.8 million times. It's been liked over 244,000 times. It's been shared over 122,000 times. How does your algorithm and your own rules get applied in this situation, and is it working?
So firstly, I'd love to pick up with you afterwards about that specific thing. Again, I can take that to my trust and safety team and get an evaluation. I think it's worth us separating two separate things here. There's the moderation approach that we take, and then there's our algorithm, which helps recommend things to individuals. The moderation approach starts very much with actually AI, and AI being able to use models to screen content that is uploaded for any of our community guidelines violations. AI is particularly good at some things. It's really good at being able to detect things like pornographic material, blood, that kind of thing. Others, it may refer to human moderators who then have to use their nuance, their skills, their training, etc., to be able to rule on other elements that can include hateful behaviour, elements that can include misinformation, misleading information as well. That is then done upon upload. We also make sure that as content grows in its level of popularity, it is re-reviewed. So when it hits certain levels of thresholds, it's not just that once you're through, you then don't have any further moderation. Actually, as it hits higher levels, it does. We can take a look and assess that one very specifically under the
this
the
account.
community
This
guidelines.
Is not their only video.
Mm-hmm.
That is exactly that. There's a repetitive, featuring Keir Starmer in AI doing various things. You can't reach 2.8 million views without some level of boost from the algorithm, can you?
So let me explain a little bit about how our algorithm works as well then. So our algorithm, as I said earlier, is based on what we call a content graph rather than a social graph. So it's not based on who you follow and what they post. It's based on what you like, your interactions with particular videos. And basically, if you can imagine what happens, we'll show you a video. And if you like it by liking it, watching it for a long time, sharing it, commenting on it, we will essentially say, okay, you like that. This cluster of users also liked that, and they liked these other 4 videos. So we'll serve these 4 videos up and see whether or not you like any more of those and continue to refine on that basis. I think when you're then talking about the specific, as I say, I can't comment on the video specifically, but I just want to highlight 2 additional things. So there are a couple of different community guidelines that we may look at something like that in. One is misinformation, and we don't allow misinformation that could result in significant harm to an individual or to society more widely. So it is worth highlighting that significant harm is the threshold. And again, I'm not a trust and safety professional, but significant harm is what we will assess on the basis.
But you say you do not want people to be misled by political or financial issues. This clearly falls into that category.
And what I was coming on to say is that from an AI perspective, you're absolutely right. We take AI very seriously.
Can an algorithm and AI checking, which you're all 3 companies are using, but the question is to you, in terms of doing moderating of content, can it identify and assess AI-generated material without a human factor?
So we're putting a lot of investment into making sure that we improve as rapidly as possible.
But can it now, today?
I'm not a technical person, so I can't give a definitive answer. I think the one thing I was going to highlight is we were the first video sharing platform to adopt standards set out by the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. And so what that is meant to do, it's worth saying, when it comes to AI, anything that is generated on TikTok is automatically labelled as AI. But obviously, sometimes it will be generated via other services. The C2PA Coalition is a group of companies that are trying to create a level of standards such that actually metadata can be shared, so that even if something is uploaded as an organic video but isn't, we have a way of being able to detect that.
Yeah.
That's a work in progress, and we're moving towards it.
If people use the TikTok tools to generate the video, it will automatically do that. Right. That's not necessarily how content is created necessarily.
And that's why we're taking these additional steps to try and account for that.
I'm conscious I'm taking up a lot of time, and I did want to just ask a question to Meta, if that's all right.
Okay.
Right. So, in December, Meta submitted some written evidence to this committee stating that third-party fact-checking program was a key part of its approach to combating misinformation. How does that fit with the new program coming in the US, and with the heavily shared leaked internal guidance suggesting that it will now permit statements such as, trans people aren't real, they are mentally ill, immigrants are grubby, filthy pieces of shit, black people are more violent than whites, and Jews are far flat out greedier than Christians, clearly promoting racist misinformation?
If I deal with I think there's 2 questions in there. So in terms of the fact checkers, we are not ending fact checking on our platforms. We are changing the way that we go about it. We've had feedback over the years that the approach that we're taking could be improved, that it wasn't as scalable as we would hope it could be. And so we are exploring, as you've noted, shifting to a community notes model. We're starting that work in the US. The intention is to deliver a system which is more scalable and has higher trust from our users in a way which still preserves the intent, which is to find and tackle misinformation on the platform. In terms of the guideline changes that you described there, look, I accept that some of those are difficult for the communities that are affected to hear. We have received, again, feedback over the months and years that in some cases, some areas of debate were being suppressed too much on our platform, and that some conversations, whilst challenging, should have a space to be discussed. Now, We retain clear rules and community standards prohibiting content which is designed to incite violence. We maintain enforcement around imminent threats of physical harm and so on, and I'm happy to share all of the details of these policies with the committee. But we are focusing our efforts.
So you just a final question. You can't possibly think that statements like this that are that there is scientific fact that proves otherwise are there for anything other than causing and inciting harm, whether online harm or in-person harm. Can you? You think this is a genuine debate, whether or not trans people are real or not, whether they're mentally ill? You think that's a debate? Is that what you're saying?
I think that what we've seen is we've had feedback, as I said, over the years that topics which have become part of mainstream discourse, conversations around some of these issues that happen among members of the public, that happen in the newspapers, that they were being suppressed on our platforms in a way which was too aggressive.
Sorry, so you're saying the statements I read earlier that are clearly not proven in scientific fact are now acceptable on all Meta platforms?
Saying that where people make statements that violate our policies, they will be actioned. Equally, we've had the feedback that there are topics where the view was there should be more room for debate and conversation.
Wow.
But I think I think
I don't even know what to say to that.
if I try to understand what you're saying, Mr. Yu, you're saying that in certain areas, in certain, the debate around issues like this has extended to a point where people are questioning whether trans exists, and some people are certainly saying, we're saying that migrants are all dirty, and that should be allowed because that may be what people are saying. I think the committee has questions on that. But do you recognise also that this is not sort of a debate that's happening? This is your promoting and pushing amplifying these statements, and that makes it a platform for that. It's not the same. It's not the same as a conversation in somebody's home. This is something that is going to be that people are going to see in their feeds. And was very upsetting during the Southport riots to see all this for many migrant communities in Newcastle, for example, and I'm sure elsewhere, to see all these comments was really upsetting and destructive, and I'm sure you must recognise that.
Can I just ask a final question? These statements, now without being an expert lawyer, but I imagine that we'll have some. These statements in themselves do not comply with UK law.
I'm not sure about that.
Well, I'm pretty sure that making statements of anti-Semitism.
But is it a matter of debate that Jews are greedier than Christians? Are you saying that? That's a matter of debate. Are you saying it's a matter of debate that black people are more violent than whites? That's a matter of debate according to Meta. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is we have had community standards on our platforms for more than 2 decades. We have revised those numerous times through the years, reflecting changes in society and changes in what's discussed. To your point around the law, we have the community standards and policies that we set and that we enforce against, and then we are clearly subject to the laws of the countries in which we operate. In the UK, the Online Safety Act is not fully into force, but it will be shortly, and we expect to be compliant with that. So, in terms of how we set this up, the standards continuously evolve in line with what's happening in society. We want to have a space where people can express themselves, and we want to make fewer mistakes around the way that we moderate.
Yeah, I think we do need to move on, but I think we would perhaps would like effectively you are confirming that leaked description of what was acceptable on Facebook, which the committee will note. I think we'd also like to write to Ofcom and see whether those statements would be in compliance with future guidelines, and if they're not illegal content. If they were illegal content, then Ofcom will expect you to take them down. If they're not illegal content, there is still the issue of them being disseminated industrially, at targeted communities, which I think the committee as a whole feels quite strongly about. But I do want to move on, just because we've got a number of other issues to get through, and I did actually want to, just before we come to Laura, I did want to just to check with Fredo regarding the X's algorithm. We've talked about the blue tick algorithm, but the committee had a presentation on the X made its algorithm public, or parts of its algorithm public, I think in 2023, and we had a presentation on that, and it was quite staggering to see the size of Twitter's, as it was, heterogeneous information network, which contains 1 billion nodes, which describes all the links between users, tweets or posts and adverts, and there's up to 100 billion connections within that. And that algorithm is effectively run 5 billion times per day. Now, that says to me that X, and I'm sure it's others, are creating the digital twin of each individual on your network, in order to target advertisements and contact at them for engagement. If that is the case, then you must have responsibility for the targeting of misinformation through those networks as well. Would you agree?
Sure, it's a fascinating technical challenge, as I'm sure you can appreciate. So every day, 500 million or so posts, right? And from those 500 or so million, we're trying to figure out in that moment what's most relevant to you. So we start with what we call candidate sourcing, and we try and understand, okay, here are 1,500 posts based on your interests, communities that you may follow and engage with that may be relevant to you. And from there, we try and rank those posts in terms of relevance. And then we apply different types of filters. Those can be sensitive content filters if you've opted not to see sensitive content, filters to filter out violations of our service. So we do have posts that are actioned, for example, under hateful conduct, that we don't recommend, that we don't include in search, that we don't allow to be reshared or replied to or quote posted. And so we filter for those things. And then finally, if you do have advertisements in your timeline, which if you're a Premium Plus subscriber, you have no advertisements in your timeline, then we see, well, what are the relevant ads that could be served to you based on, again, advertisers that are targeting a specific type of content, and they have their own controls. They have adjacency controls.
I think I understand that, and I appreciate you going through the process, because it's useful to understand. But the fact is that you've collected an enormous amount of data on each individual, which you use, therefore, their links, what they liked, which you use to target information or content and perhaps advertising to them. So you must have a responsibility for the misinformation that comes through to them as well.
Yes, and that's why we created a community notes.
Well, okay, so I'm glad to have you accept that responsibility. We, I think, have discussed the extent to which community notes are effective, and I'm sure we will continue to do that. But now I wanted to hand over to Lauren.
Thank you, G. As was stated earlier today, and it's being shared cross-party, the first duty of a government is to keep its people safe and protect them from harm. Is social media a threat to the people of the UK, and can you be trusted to mark your own homework to moderate to prevent harm? And if you can go along briefly, that would be great.
So for us, freedom of speech and expression is fundamental to a democracy, and so our goal is to protect that freedom of expression within the boundaries of the law and the jurisdictions in which we operate.
Do you then recognise that with that, there will be the potential for harm that may come from that?
Of course, we understand that every day there's many categories of harm that we have to account for, and that's why we have policies and procedures in place to deal with those harms based on the risks that they pose to our users and their safety every day.
Thank you. I'll follow up again afterwards. Thank you.
Yeah.
Of course. Look, keeping people safe on our platforms is our top priority. I've described some of the rules and policies that we have in place, and some of the enforcement and the technology that we use to do that. We publish extensive transparency reports documenting our policies and how we enforce them. Just to give you a couple of examples here, for terrorist content on our platform, which is prohibited, our systems now find and remove more than 99% of that content before it is reported to us or before someone sees it. And to give you a sense of what that means in terms of someone's practical experience, and you can find this in our transparency reports, we talk about something called prevalence, which is of all the content that you might see on Facebook or Instagram, how many of those posts contain content which violates our policies. In this instance, it is 0.05%, so that is 5 in every 10,000 posts. Now, that is 5 more than I would like, but it is a significant effort. And these transparency reports, you talked about marking our own homework, we have these independently audited by EY, so we are not marking our own homework here. And I would encourage the committee really to just study those, and we'd be happy to follow up if you have other questions around them. Beyond that, as you will all be very well aware, we and others have engaged extensively with Parliament and Government on the Online Safety Act, as it now is. That, I think, was clearly a momentous effort over a number of years, but also has got us to a place where there's a recognition that what matters here is having the right systems and processes in place and then having an independent regulator hold the companies to account. So that all of that is not yet fully enforced, but it will be soon. We have a regular dialogue with the regulator and we expect to comply with it, and I think that's appropriate.
Thank you. No?
So look, safety has been our North Star since day one. We're a much younger platform than some of our competitors. We only launched in the UK at the end of 2018. So from the outset, we've designed safety. We've included safety by design in creating our product, and partly as a competitive advantage. We were coming into a very competitive market and needed to win advertisers and create a good user experience. We're guided by community principles that then feed through into our community guidelines. And it's worth me just pulling out two. Absolutely one of those is prevent harm. It's why we have tens of thousands of trust and safety professionals around the world and are spending $2 billion on safety this year, right the way up until our global CEO who has safety objectives as part of his OKRs, the key objectives that he sets for the year. But we also have a principle to make sure that we enable free expression, because creativity on our platform is unlocked by free expression, and so we draw up our community guidelines in line with UN principles on human rights, the ability to express freely, etc. Like other panellists, we also produce significant amounts of transparency reports, information in our transparency centre, and the total amount of violative content, so content that violates our community guidelines, that is removed proactively by us is 98.2%. 85% of that has received 0 views, 98% has received less than 1,000 views. That is not 100, and it's a race that is never run, and we will continue to invest in order to try and narrow that even further. But I think when colleagues would have been sat here sort of 2 or 3 years ago, that number would have been in the 80s. So the investment is paying off, and we're doing things. I think the one additional thing I'd highlight is we are already regulated by Ofcom. We've been regulated by Ofcom for 4 years as a video sharing platform under the transposition of the AVMS directive into UK law at the end of 2020. So we have a very, very close relationship with them. We meet with them very regularly. They have a very firm understanding of our policies, our enforcement, and our approach to wider issues. And so I would definitely say that with that framework, with the coming OSA framework and with our Transparency Centre, it's not a case of us marking our own homework. We are driving this activity and driving this enforcement because it makes sense for our users, it makes sense for our platform.
Thank you. Just to follow on, so if we can accept that harm occurs on social media platforms, whether that be the illegal violent content or whether that be algorithms to promoting violence, self-harm, bullying online, disinformation, what role, in including fraud, and just to Mr. Yu there about Facebook Marketplace and the amount of fraud that has occurred there and that has been reported in, should that be reported? It's our banks that then pay for the fraud and nothing to do with yourselves, even though you are hosting the potential fraud. Does that make sense? And do you think that's fair, and should Facebook play an equal share. But in terms of the wider harm as well, do you think social media platforms have a role and a place in restoring and repairing the harm that has been created?
So, let me just take a couple of those points in there. So, fraud is a concern for everybody. Clearly, we don't want to see this on our platform. Violates a number of our policies. We look for it and we try to remove it, and where it's reported to us, we investigate and take the appropriate action. We have a dialogue with government and with a number of other partners around how we can make progress around this. One of the things which we've done recently is more information sharing actually between our platform and the banks, because often actually it's a complicated chain of events that ends up with someone being defrauded. And so it's important that there's actually more information flowing between the different organisations so that we can learn the lessons and try to stamp it out. I think on your wider point around how we engage, then I think we have ongoing dialogue with a number of organisations like you would expect across civil society, across academia and elsewhere. We try to contribute to the conversation, we try to explain what's happening on our platforms, and we try to learn from and listen to other people. And I think that's right and proper for companies like ours and the role that we play in society to be part of that debate. We want our platform to be better. We want our users to have a great experience on it. We want our advertisers to be confident in our platforms and our products. So it's squarely in everybody's interests to make sure that happens.
I suppose that the real nub of it is social media platforms make a huge amount of profit off of providing content and all the things that we want to see, but there is a darker side to unintended consequences, misinformation, all those sorts of things. Do you think that there is a role, though, for actually mitigating and using some of that money to help support and protect and repair some of the damage that has been done?
For us, the first line of defence is to use the technology to reduce the harm at source.
100%. All up for that. Yeah. What do you think about, until we're there and until it's a perfect system where nothing can get through that's not misinformation, what about the consequences to the victims? Do you think you have a role in support? Like you said, you're working with civil society. Does that mean that you're funding some of the civil society? You're helping towards youth projects? What does that look like?
We have a range of dialogues and partnerships. And over the years, we've worked with a number of different organisations on some of the topics that you've described there and others.
Do you have a foundation?
Sorry, excuse me?
Do you have a charitable foundation?
For Meta specifically, yes. No, we don't. No. But we have, over the years, worked with partners and supported different projects. Those with money, yeah. Okay. And those change over time. But I think as the important thing here is that there is this dialogue and relationship between the companies, civil society, our users, our advertisers, businesses more broadly. Like, we are all in this together. It's for us to play our part.
Feel like that though, does it sometimes?
I think the we're all on this earth together, but some have far greater power and influence and financial resources than others, and I think that's something that we want to explore a bit more detail now, Alison, in terms of the business models.
If I have time to come back on the generative AI content, sure. I'd appreciate it, but I can jump to the business models. And just to pick up on a couple of previous questions, can I just ask about the TikTok algorithm? Mm-hmm. Because you talked about how the algorithm works by looking at likes, shares, and time viewing. Mm-hmm. Now, human behaviour is such that sensationalist content would be that we would likely to view that slightly longer. So we don't know... we don't know what your TikTok algorithm is and how those different parameters are weighted. So you might weight more for the time viewing, and that would be related to advertising revenue, because the longer somebody views content, the more money that is made. So, you know, are you willing to make your algorithm a little bit more transparent so that we can view that?
So let me do a little bit on business model and then algorithm transparency. So just on business model, it's worth saying that TikTok is perhaps different to some of our competitors. So it's not a case of an advert that is a pre-roll attached to a particular video. Actually, if you're on the For You feed and you're scrolling through videos, an advert will be served as video content in between those, and you can either watch it or you can flick on. And what that means is that there's not a direct link between a huge amount of views to a particular video and being able to monetize against that video. Actually, the goal of our algorithm is to provide a positive experience for users overall. And again, you'll commonly find if you're on TikTok that you may flick past a post with thousands of views and then flick onto a post that has very few views, you know, like single-digit number of likes, that kind of thing. Because the algorithm is designed to vary your experience, to provide different things that might surprise you or make you curious, where you can discover, etc. So our model is not on the basis of here's a piece of viral content, let's monetize against that. Our model is on the basis of creating an overall environment that people want to be in, that they feel safe and can express themselves in, and therefore continue to return. It's advertising based a lot more on reach than it is specific views, if that makes sense.
Relates to your infinite content feed that you do,
The scrolling.
which will lead you there, but there's some evidence that there might be harm for that because that creates that dopamine feedback loop. So, you know, are you worried about that?
Look, we take the well-being of our users incredibly seriously, and we don't want to be in a situation where people are using our app and then finding themselves burnt out, tired, exhausted, etc. It's one of the reasons why we worked with the Digital Wellness Centre at Boston Children's Hospital to implement a 1 hour screen time limit for under 18 users. It's one of the reasons why we have 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. cut-off for our under 16 and under 18 users for notifications coming from the app, because we do recognise that sometimes people will need a prompt to do something else. Again, our model is based on the idea that people will have a healthy, positive, valuable relationship with the app that, you know, means that they continue to come back. I did just want to maybe just quickly touch on transparency, because you mentioned the algorithm transparency bit. So I think there's 3 things to say there. The first is that we have a research API, which more than 600 researchers around the world have access to, that provides level of data for them to be able to investigate independently trends that they see, content that is becoming popular, and that sort of thing. The second, we have a number of trust and accountability transparency and accountability centres across the world, including one in Dublin, which the committee has a standing invite to come and see. Part of that involves having a conversation with the algorithm team about the way that it works, and we even have a code room within there where you can have a level of review. And finally, we have a relationship in the US with Oracle, who review the source code of the app prior to its upload to the App Store. So we do have a number of different touch points upon which there's a level of transparency.
Chris, I'm going to come to you, and just before I do, I've just got to say that I am hosting a Meta event on Monday via the AIAPPG, so I just for transparency, I thought I'd say that one. And this could be one that you all answer really, but I'll direct to Chris. What challenges does online advertising play a role in incentivising harmful content?
If anything, the reverse. So harmful content is not something that we want to see on our platforms. It's not something that our users want to see, and it's not something that our advertisers want to see.
Okay, simple answer to that one. The United Nations Global Principles for Information Integrity states that the technology sector has designed digital advertising processes to be complex and opaque with minimal human oversight. And I've sort of looked into this with various sort of ad libraries, and you know, and the sort of people can bid for what sites that they go to have their ads on and added on. So, you know, again, there's viral ads and sensationalist content will be there. So do you agree with it that it is complex and opaque?
I think it is. Like clearly, when the technology is evolving quickly, some of these issues are difficult for non-specialists to get their heads fully around, and I think that's a consequence of how sophisticated the world has become. Nevertheless, we strive to provide as much transparency and insight as we can into the way that our systems are set up. Certainly for users on our platforms, we provide information both in terms of our guidelines. We talk about the different ways that our systems are built and how they work together. So we publish things like model cards and systems cards, which try in reasonably plain English to describe how different components of the technology work and how they connect together. And we try to provide a lot of controls for users so that they have the ability to tell us in more detail if you want to see less of certain types of content or more of other types of content, to have those controls on the platform. Transparency around, on Facebook, for example, you can push a button to say, why am I seeing this? And you can see some insights into what it is that's causing a particular piece of content to be ranked there for you. So we strive really hard to provide the transparency for users around this.
Can I just
add one more question very quickly? Because and then if there is time to come back to Jen A, I'd appreciate it. But to Wilfredo, you mentioned earlier about demonetisation, and that's one of the recommended standards by the EU that you demonetise it. Now, during the riots, some of these far right accounts were estimated to be making like 27k, from all of this generated content. Have you demonetised those, and how do you demonetise?
So any post that receives a community note is demonetized.
Can that process be gamed, where people can make a community note on genuine content to try and reduce that level of exposure to true content?
So the community note doesn't have any impact on reach. It simply has an impact on the ability to monetize the post. The only way a community note ends up on a post is when two contributors agree who have historically disagreed. And so it bridges diverse perspectives. It's called a bridge ranking algorithm, and it's completely transparent. All the data is completely accessible, so any researcher can audit the entire history of community notes. We have researchers that are downloading that data every day. We have nearly 1 million contributors around the world, and over 70,000 community notes contributors here in the UK.
But I think we established earlier that there weren't community notes on many of the very the horrendous posts that Emily mentioned, and there were not community notes on the posts which identified gave the wrong name for the killer in the Southport attack. So if that is your only way of taking the money with them, it's not very. I've got to say, it doesn't seem like it's very effective, given that.
We recognize that there's a challenge of speed and scale, and that's getting better as the system improves and as the number of contributors grow. I've come with specific examples in relation to the incident where community notes, did end up on posts. So again, happy to share those with the committee and share others as well.
I want to push back on your opening statements were that you did not make profit or didn't make money from the Southport riots. Meta has a stock market capitalization of $1.5 trillion, makes 164, has total revenues of 164 billion. And 98% of its revenues come from advertising. X has a stock market capitalization of 9.4 billion, has profits or has total revenues of 2.9 billion, and 90% of your revenues come from advertising. TikTok is privately owned, so it doesn't have a stock market capitalization, but 80% of your revenues come from advertising, and you make profits of $15 billion on revenue, $15 billion on revenues of $18.5 billion. So you are making a significant revenues on advertising, and you're also just for comparison, your multiplier between your stock market capitalization in revenue, for Meta it's 9, for X it's 3, whereas Walmart, a staid, if you like, retail company, the multiplier is barely 1. So you are clearly, you're making money from advertising, and it's also clearly influencing your stock price. So how, given that your stock price is also driven by active users on a monthly or weekly basis, and that, as we heard, I think it was Alison that said, that following the Southport attack, far-right influencers such as Andrew Tate, Lawrence Fox, etc., got 40 million ad impressions on X in the week following the Southport attacks. And there would also have been an increase in activity. There wasn't, I think you'll acknowledge, there was an increase in activity on Facebook and on TikTok. Surely, if your business model is based on advertising, it's driven by activity, you must have made money from there being greater activity following the Southport attacks. I'll just start. Yes. Just quickly, so not to go through your process again, but just like quick. Yes.
So we're an ads business. Yes. The content around the Southport attacks and the subsequent unrest that we described. I talked about actually the efforts that we went to remove that content from our platform because we don't want to see that on our platform.
You may not have wanted to, but you must have done so, is my argument.
We removed tens of thousands of posts, the vast majority of those proactively, and it's not in our interests for our users to have a bad experience on the platform. Like, the last thing that we want is for our users to have a bad experience. Okay,
Wilfredo, did X make money out of the increased activity?
As I mentioned, it's common for advertisers to pause during heated moments on the platform. We work every single day to earn the trust of our users and our advertisers, and that work continues. And so, when it comes to whether we profited or not on a specific incident, I think zooming out, we see advertisers want their content and their advertisements to be brand safe, and that's why we have put so much effort into controls for advertisers to make sure that their advertisements are around content that they deem safe, and that's our goal with advertisers.
Sorry, Alistair, just quickly, and I'll come to you.
Yeah, sure.
I'll come to Emily now. No, just Alistair here.
Look, again, I think we are a different kind of service. We're an entertainment service first. It's not chronological posts.
80% of your revenue is from advertising.
So absolutely from advertising. Yes. But to your point on a particular high-profile event driving a greater, I think we see uptick in activity when the Euros is on, or where Taylor Swift was doing the Eras tour. That's the kind of majority of content on our platform is entertainment, joyful type content. We absolutely have an incentive to be as robust as we are on enforcing our community guidelines. Similar to what panellists have said, large brands want that level of safety. I think the only other thing I wanted to highlight is we operate a different monetization model for creators, again, because we're not doing pre-roll against a specific video. You don't get money as a creator from a particular advert. We have a creator rewards program, a creativity program, which is sort of designed to encourage creators. You have to be over the age of 18, you have to have a certain level of quality, you have to abide by our community guidelines, etc. So the actual incentives on our creators as well are that monetization comes from high quality content, not just the idea of reach.
I expect your answers, but given the figures here, given the level of revenues and stock market capitalization and profits, I do not see how you do not have an incentive to have greater advertising spend driven by however it is driven. But let me go to.
So two quick points of clarification for Mr. Fernandez. Firstly, you said during points of high tension, advertisers tend to pause. Did that happen post Stockport? Did advertisers pause on X?
I think it's been widely reported that there was pause on advertising.
Could you write to us with because you said you have an API that gives you all that information, so could you write to us with those figures?
Okay.
The other thing is, I wanted just a point of clarification on your community note system. It says that it involves two people that disagree agreeing to put a community note on. Now, given some of the posts that I read out earlier, and particularly the ones that are inciting violence against women, calling for people to be gang raped and others, is that considered an opinion where two people don't have to agree? Or it seems what it seems to me, and if I understand your community notes properly, you're saying that Andrew Tate, in his calling Labour all a bunch of rapists, would have to agree for a community note to go onto that post, no matter how many people actually flagged it as misinformation. Is that right?
So again, taking a step back to the system, we have a network of contributors. Those contributors rate notes and earn the ability eventually to write notes, which is a privilege that they may lose. They participate in the system pseudonymously, and they start by rating the helpfulness of notes based on a series of heuristics, whether it's neutral language, whether it contains a high-quality citation, whether it directly addressed the post claim. Now, based on the history of their other ratings, that is how you build a profile on that particular contributor. And then when those two individuals agree that the proposed note is helpful, that is when that note is placed on the post. If another note comes along, it is rated more helpful, it will replace that post. If that note is up for a period of 2 weeks, then it is locked onto that post and cannot be removed.
The original poster does not have to agree to the community note.
That's correct.
Right. And how does one become a community note contributor?
Sure.
And are you paid in this role? Is this a human fact-checking role?
So it's unpaid. Anyone who has a verified phone number, an account in good standing with no violations, and a verified phone number can sign up to be a contributor. We onboard contributors every week in a fair and randomized process globally. Again, we're now near 1 million contributors, over 70,000 here in the UK and growing. And the UK happens to be one of our sort of top 5 markets where engagement on community notes is high.
Okay. So a final question, just to understand how this community note process works. Is the list of your community note people who you have selected to become community
We don't select, just to be clear. There is no human at X. It's based on a random number generator that automatically onboards so long as they meet the criteria.
Right. So you've got an algorithm that onboards
Yes.
people. Is that algorithm that chooses and selects, is that available for the public to see, for academic researchers
Yes.
to test and analyse, and can you share it with the committee?
Absolutely. It's publicly available. It's an open source technology available to anyone. We see a really great system of software developers that are constantly working on it to help improve it. All the data associated with community notes is publicly available. We update it every single day. We have researchers that are downloading it every single day.
Can you tell us the proportion who are male or female, or just?
So we don't collect any demographic data
Okay.
on contributors, and again, all contributors are on
Anonymous.
the public data.
Okay, thanks very much. I think we need to move on. We've got 7 minutes left, and I know that Alison wants to come back, and I know that Liz, you have a question as well.
Do. This is on the Online Safety Act, which
Yes,
Mr. you mentioned earlier. Can I ask each of you if you can say how the Online Safety Act would have changed events leading up to the riots if it had been in effect? And if I can start with Mr. Yu.
So I think the Online Safety Act is designed around this notion of having good systems and processes in place and ensuring that companies follow those processes and enforce them correctly. That's what we strive to do throughout the incidents last summer.
Okay, so it wouldn't have made any difference, is what you're saying, if it had been in effect?
Well, I think, as I say, we have the systems and processes in place. I think that, like we were talking about earlier, there are always lessons that one can learn from these experiences, but nevertheless, the systems that we designed, the crisis protocols that existed were put into effect. We had good engagement with government and others. And as the Online Safety Act comes into force, we expect to comply with it.
Okay, and if I can ask Mr. Law?
Yeah, as I said earlier, we're regulated already by Ofcom under the video sharing platform regime. So I think I would echo some of what Chris just said in terms of our crisis protocols exist to protect users, and I think that the Online Safety Act, Ofcom have talked about the potential for looking further at crisis management protocols. We're confident in the steps that we took. We have taken Ofcom through the steps that we took around Southport, so they're fully appraised of the mechanisms that we had and the approaches that we used.
And Mr. Fernandez.
Yeah, we're pleased to have a productive relationship with Ofcom and met with them in the wake of the incident, and I think the Online Safety Act's risk-based approach is consistent with how we deal with these incidents and the protocols that we have in place and how we work to prevent harm and how we prioritize in those moments. And, I think pointing to Section 22 of the Online Safety Act, so when deciding on and implementing safety measures and policies, a duty to have a particular regard to the importance of protecting users' right to freedom of expression within the law. And I think that's a really great framing for how we think about the tension with freedom of expression in these moments of heated debate and violence and hatred, and dealing in the tension with freedom of expression.
But when someone was incorrectly named as the perpetrator of the situation in Southport, it took quite a while to have that post taken down, didn't it?
We saw community notes that corrected that, and we recognize that was an early challenge in the wake of the incident.
I'll just ask if you feel, you talk about the tension with freedom of expression, which is something that the owner of X, Elon Musk, has spoken very powerfully about. Do you think that X is a safer online environment since Mr. Musk bought it?
I do, and I think you can look to our transparency report from last year and the one that's soon forthcoming that will give you a picture of the last year and the actions that we took and the trends in reporting and trends in activities and content violations. And you'll see we have a very dedicated and diligent safety team, which we've renamed to the safety team from Trust and Safety, because we know that's something that we have to earn every single day from our users and our customers. So, I'm very proud to represent the work of our safety team.
How can your safety have increased when the number of anti-Semitic tweets has risen from 2 per Jew per year, that's 500,000 per year, to 4 per Jew per year, that's 2 million a day in the UK? How's that making it safer for Jews?
We work on that issue very closely with partners around the globe to understand how they're experiencing anti-Semitism, and has a few different manifestations when it comes to our policies. It's not just hateful conduct, it's violent event denial, it's abuse and harassment, it's glorification of violence and previous atrocities. So we take that very seriously, and that's why we continue that work diligently with those partners to better understand it. Clearly, in the wake of October 7th, it's a different reality for those in the Jewish community around the world, both online and offline. And that's a real challenge that we deal with every day.
Do you think the Nazis sharing videos of the Nazi salute on the platform is appropriate and makes it a safer platform?
I think there's a lot of discussion around that, and that's why the platform allows for people to debate it and discuss it.
Alison, did you?
Very quick, I want to just jump back to generative AI and the use of AI in creating false images, particularly. They're very hard to detect by automated systems over text data, for example, for moderation purposes. And linked to the online harms, for people to be able to understand that what they are viewing is fake and isn't real, even if it is just filters that make somebody look better than they are, can affect mental health. But fake imagery of false crimes, such as, Asian men, Muslim men chasing a blonde toddler, which is one of your posts that I think you have left up because it some external moderation. So, but I do know that both TikTok and Meta are looking to do info labels, so labelling this content generated. Is that metadata? Is it visible to users so they can assess for themselves that what they're viewing is fake, and then that for anybody sharing clearly fake imagery that is harmful can be held to account?
So I think it's important to note here, our policies around the content that's permitted on the platform apply regardless of whether the content is AI generated or not. And then, as you've mentioned, where content is generated by our AI tools, we label that accordingly.
Is it visible to the user?
With a visible watermark on the image, and an additional label on the post, on the feed. Where AI content is created by tools that aren't ours, but where has been AI generated, we will label those as well whenever we can detect the metadata or the invisible watermarks in the content, and we label that for users accordingly because we think transparency around this is important. We are, working very hard with partners to make sure that can be even more effective, and working all the time on technologies to make sure that we're able to moderate our platform effectively. It is a fast-moving environment. I don't think that what we have is perfect, but yes, we want to make sure that transparency is there.
Okay, well, I think we're out of time there. I really appreciate your spending time with us, and it's been a lively discussion. I think you've given us a lot to think about. You've given us a lot to take away. I certainly understand better your relevant processes and algorithms. I'm not sure I understand better sort of the future of the spread of misinformation but that's something that the committee will consider. But I do want to thank you very, very much for spending your time here. As I said earlier today, I know that one of the things that makes my constituents frustrated is the sense that platforms such as X, Meta, and Instagram and TikTok, are not something, they are not accountable. And are not something that they have any agency over, and yet have a big impact on their lives. So I think that by coming to speak to us today, you've at least supported, as you set out in your, on the first question, the accountability towards the British people through Parliament. We really appreciate that, and we appreciate very much the time that you spent with us. Order.